I have the pleasure to be here for the second time, and thanks. Yes, I have the pleasure to be here for the second time, and I think this DevOps Days is awesome. And Andrew asked me to talk about what DevOps is to me. And the problem with talking about what DevOps is that really nobody knows. DevOps is a kind of a ground roots movement. It kind of happened. Nobody planned it. There's no manifesto. It's not like Agile. We have the Agile manifesto. There is no DevOps manifesto. There's no formal definition of what DevOps is. So it's really easy to talk about what DevOps is not, what DevOps is to you, but nobody can answer the question, what's DevOps? So, one second. Okay. So, it's easy to talk about what it's not. It's not a tool. It's not a job description or role. And in many companies, you go to this company and you say, do you have DevOps? And they go like, oh, yeah, he's sitting over there. And you're like, no, that's not. And, you have vendors that try to sell DevOps tools. And it's not that we don't need tools for DevOps, but DevOps is not tooling. It's something else. And when you try to reason about what DevOps is, or at least for me, I think that DevOps is the way we work and behave. Basically, it's culture, it's organizational structure, it's communication, those kind of things. So I think that it's very important to understand, where does this come from? If we want to understand what DevOps is. And not very long ago, we didn't have this thing called operations. We always had something called IT operations, and recently we now have web operations, and we have this cultural rift between them, a change in mindset, where developers always try to push features because they're measured on progress in terms of features, of business features. And operations, on the other hand, they're measured on stability, on uptime, whatever that means. And we had this rift where developers wanted change, and operations and IT wanted stability. They wanted to hold back change. And between those two, we had a big divide, big separation, where it was very hard to push work forward and to get feedback from operations and production. And we call this the wall of confusion. And about 5 years ago, some people tried to solve this. They got to the point where they thought, we need to change something in the way we work between operations and developers and QA and product and everybody else. And that's how DevOps started. And this is what DevOps is for most people, or at least for the people who are very involved in DevOps days. But for me, DevOps is this moment when we stopped just doing the work and we started looking at how are we doing this work and why are we doing this work the way that we do. And for me, this happened a few years ago when I read a book by this guy. And this guy is called Fred Brooks. And he wrote a seminal book called The Mythical Man Month. That was around 1975, pretty early. He was working as a project manager on the AS400 project, if I remember correctly, in IBM. And his book was about software development project management, which sounds amazingly boring. I trust you and trust me in this. This is not a boring book. This is an amazing book. And it really opened my mind. It got me thinking about, the fallacies of software project management and how they affect the people that work in this project, in projects. It really highlighted for me the importance of understanding organizational structure and culture. And this guy, in 1975, he spoke about cross-functional teams and communication patterns and modularity and feedback. And again, this was 1975. And it's amazing. And the sad thing is that he says that his book is like the Bible, in the sense that everybody heard about it, some people read it, and almost nobody follows it. So, it literally got me, it opened my mind, got me thinking about a lot of different things that I never heard about before. And then I read stuff by this guy. And this guy, if you don't know who this is Edward Deming. And he's also known as the father of modern manufacturing. This guy is the reason why you buy Toyota, and not American cars. He literally took the devastated Japanese economy and reconstructed it to be one of the best manufacturing economies in the world. He's the father of a lot of manufacturing methods like statistical process control and so on. And when I read his work, and by the way, it's amazing, I learned a lot of things. I learned, for example, to think about the system, and that we should fix the system and not symptoms. And I learned that we should focus on quality and long-term goals, as opposed to focusing on short-term goals and just rebooting servers. And I also learned something else that was very, very important: to think about workers and the people who do the work. And Deming, for example, said that 94% of all the faults and all the problems are in the system. They're not due to workers. And you can play around that number however you want. The principle remains the same. It's the system that's the problem, not the people. And he really emphasized respect for professional pride and people. And that influenced me a lot. And then I met this guy. I haven't met him in person. I read his work. And it actually turns out that my mother was a childhood friend of him, and which I didn't know at the time. And this guy is called Eliyahu Goldblatt. He's an ex-physicist. He used to be had a PhD in physics, and he's Israeli. He died a few years ago. And he's the father of something called Theory of Constraints. And he wrote a seminal book called The Goal, about, I think it was the early 80s. And again, that book was like really amazing. And it's like a novel. It's not a hard book to read. And it blows your mind. I mean, amazing concepts. And from his work, I learned to search for constraints. Theory of constraints is a theory that says that you cannot locally optimize a system, because in every system, there's one constraint and one constraint only. And if you optimize anywhere else, then you're doing nothing, basically, because the constraint will always hold you back. So, a great example would be like a water pipe. And if you try to push water through that pipe, you can't push any more water because, the pipe has a thin size. If you try to do something after the pipe, it's not going to help because only so much water goes through. So you have to deal with the constraint, the size of the pipe. So that's basically the theory of constraints. And that made me think about how to focus on global optimization rather than local optimization, and completely changed the way I think. So this is what DevOps is to me. DevOps to me is to think about the processes, to think about the culture, to think about organizational structure, think about the people, instead of just going in and doing configuration management or automation or whatever it is that we're doing normally during our work days. But really, it's not very important what DevOps is to me. I mean, it's fun to talk about it, but what's really important is what's DevOps to you, because DevOps is a ground-roots movement, and you're all going to go back to your own companies, and you're going to ask yourselves, how do I get DevOps in here? And your DevOps is probably very different than my DevOps, and that's a good thing. We shouldn't have a uniform DevOps. DevOps is whatever helps you work better. DevOps is whatever helps you, achieve your goals. So, anyway, that's DevOps for me, and I think that now it's a good time to switch. Awesome. So now we get to the real part. Yeah, sorry. And I'm going to introduce myself now. My name is Avishai. I work for a company called FewBytes, and it's an Israel-based consulting company. We do a lot of work in terms of helping people to automate, helping them with operations, software development, a bunch of other stuff. And as a consultant, I've been working as a consultant for over 5 years now. I've seen a lot of companies embrace a lot of ways to manage work. Different software development methodologies, things like Scrum and Kanban and DevOps and Lean and Agile, and all those words. And what I found was that all of those companies are in constant pursuit of, methods and methodologies to manage work. And you start asking yourself, why are we in this pursuit? Why do we keep looking for ways to manage work? So it turns out that just defining what work is not very simple. And one of the reasons, in my mind anyway, that we keep looking for methods to manage work is because we don't understand what work is very well. So what's work? Okay, this blocked.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's crashed.
Mac just works. Try now.
And I think it's stuck. You want to reset it?
Yeah.
Just. Awesome. So I studied physics originally, and this is what work is for me. Work equals force times the amount of distance that you moved. I think it's a very good definition. It doesn't help you very much when you're doing work in your company, but for me at least it's a very good definition. The way most people think about work is something like this. It's a set of tasks, a set of activities that we have to do, usually requires some effort, in order to achieve some goal, usually a business goal. And we think of work as something that's planned, managed, ordered, accounted for, because otherwise we won't get paid. So this is how most of us think about work. And we're going to come back to this model in a few minutes. But it's very interesting to ask, how did we get this model? And it's not very obvious how we got it. And it all started with something called division of labor. So about 5,000 years ago, or even more, we were all the generalists. We did everything. We hunted, we grew our own food, we created our own clothes, we created our own tools, we did everything. But over time, we started specializing. We found that if we do one thing, we're more efficient at it. And we got farmers, we got blacksmiths, we got bakers, and so on. But it wasn't until the 18th century and the 19th century when people started focusing on this idea like methodologically, or however you say it. People like Adam Smith wrote books about it. And then came the Industrial Revolution. And during the Industrial Revolution, we really used that principle. We started having machines that only do one thing, and we started having workers that only knew how to operate those machines. And after a while, we needed standardization, because if I'm creating nuts and the other guy is creating bolts, I can't use those nuts with those bolts unless they have the same size. They have to fit. So we got standards. We got meters, kilograms, and so on. And then we developed some other stuff. When you're all working on some very small subtask of the overall work, then you're not aware of where this bolt is going for. What are people going to do with it? How many bolts do I need to manufacture? So we got management. And when we got management needed information in order to manage. So they started asking things like, how long is this going to take for you? And that's how we got time estimations and Gantt charts. So at the end of this process, we ended up with all those things. Departments, handoffs between departments, management, time estimation, Gantt charts, and so on. And it's a little known fact that management, for example, has existed less than 200 years. It's a pretty new profession. We always had foremen, business owners, but the concept of the hired professional manager, that's relatively new. And it's very important to remember because the theory of management and the practice of management is a very young profession and it's not very well refined. And you should relate because software engineering is even younger. So how does this translate to software development world? Waterfall, the methodology we all know and love. And in Waterfall, we had this iterative process where you started doing one task, then you move to another task, and so on. And usually you hand off between teams, and you have this nice Gantt chart where everything is laid out, and you know in advance what you're going to be doing the next year, or sometimes the next 3 years because the project runs late. It sounds funny, but this method was actually pretty great. it was based on the premise that good design and good specifications are going to prevent a lot of problems. They're going to prevent implementation errors. If I give you a very good detailed documentation and design, then maybe you won't, misimplement it. And the problem was that bugs that are caught early on cost less money to solve than bugs that you catch, at a very later stage of the project. So the thought was, if we prevent those bugs from happening, we're going to save a lot of money and a lot of problems. And also fit the worldview of top-down management, of hierarchical management, because, everything breaks down to neat little boxes. And also remember that, during the 60s and 70s, software was often developed in tandem with the hardware. And in a lot of cases, you couldn't do testing until the end of the project because the hardware wasn't ready yet. So this model actually made a lot of sense at the time. And it worked. We delivered a lot of, great projects, a lot of working software, a lot of the base systems that we used for many, many years, including mainframes and so on, were developed using waterfall. So it was a success in some sense. Supported a lot of large-scale projects. And then the world changed. What happened? Internet. Until the internet, we had to ship physical boxes. And that meant that we could only update our software every quarter, half a year. You remember those days when we had Office 97 and we needed to wait 3 whole years just to get Office 2000. And this is the world I'm talking about. But then the internet happened and we got downloadable updates. Now you could push new software to your clients every 3 weeks, every week. That's not the only thing that changed. We suddenly got feedback from clients. Because until we got the internet, you had to get all the tickets from support, work on them, summarize them, and then feed them back to the waterfall. With internet, we started getting those buttons, send report, I have an error, send feedback. And we could get feedback to our developers very, very fast. So waterfall was not very well suited for this. It clogged, basically. With waterfall, we couldn't work as fast. We couldn't use that feedback very fast. And most projects were late with waterfall because everything that, every step we had, a tiny variation of work, of the amount of work, and it accumulated over the life cycle of the project. So most of our waterfall project, came in a year late, or 100% late. And all the problems were pushed to the end, to this very long debugging cycle and maintenance cycle at the end, making the projects even later. Customer feedback always came too late, and we couldn't use the feedback that we got from the internet. Overall, it was very, very slow. We needed something better that fits our new technology and our new ways of doing work. And we invented a lot of different models to deal with that, like Agile and Scrum and so on. So let me ask you a question. Going back to the model, to this model, this very nice model. Think about your work week, like last week or the week before that. How does this model fit? Does it fit your work? So I don't know about you guys, but this doesn't fit my work at all. For example, if you read the Phoenix Project, which is a very good book, and I recommend that you read it, they're talking about 4 types of work: business projects, IT projects, changes, and unplanned work. Unplanned work doesn't even fit this model because we're talking about planned work. And in operations, at least, unplanned work can take most of your time, actually. If you're thinking about how you work, or at least I'm thinking about how I work, I write some code, I run the tests, they don't work, I try to fix them, finally they work on my computer, I push the code, it goes into CI, the CI says build is broken, I go and debug where the build is broken, I find there's a problem in the build server, and in the staging or integration database, I fix that problem, then I have to fix something in the OS, then I have to fix something with the power because, the power is flaky, and this has nothing to do with what I started with. And this is how I work. And it's not managed in any way, it's not ordered, It's definitely not accounted for, and oh yeah, it's not very well planned. So for me at least, this model doesn't seem to make sense. And we tried to fix some of this with all of those methods. And this is the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto was written around 2001, but the principles behind it date back, I think, maybe 20 years. Early 80s, late 70s, more or less. So Agile values individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Does that sound familiar? Things that we talk about in DevOps? Work in software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Responding to change over following a plan. We've acknowledged that work is not very well planned and we can't plan for it. So it's a big change in mindset. And you would think that now that we've adopted Agile, that's going to fix everything, right? Unfortunately, a lot of problems still remain. A lot of things remain the same. Although we embraced, new methods of working, we're still suffering from a lot of the problems that Agile aimed to solve. We keep missing our clients' expectations. Our development is still very slow in a lot of companies. We focus on local goals instead of global goals. And we have late projects all the time. But the most problematic thing, for me at least, is that you still see this horrible blame game in a lot of companies. And the question is why? How did we get to this point where Agile failed so miserably? For example, in a lot of companies, I still see silos. And if you read the Agile principles, they're talking about business people and developers working together and about self-organizing teams. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen a lot of self-organizing teams in many organizations. You still have silos that are directed and defined from the top. And those silos usually revolve around some tool or some profession. They're not cross-functional teams. They're not focused on business. They're not working together with business. And the problem with silos is, and I'm not against silos in any way, I'm just against their borders. The problem with silos that have arbitrary borders is that arbitrary borders, cause a lot of problems. You can't just split work however you want. And a great example of this is geography. When the colonial powers left Africa, they drew up borders. They split Africa. And they didn't care about the borders very much. They just wanted to get out. So they took rulers, and you can see those very, very straight lines of borders that they drew because they were lazy. And those borders caused a lot of problems because you suddenly had countries that were made up of rival tribes, or you split a tribe in the middle. You split, the border crosses rivers, crosses mountains, making borders that are very, very hard to maintain. And what we got was 5 decades of war in Africa. And it's very sad. But this is something that also happens in companies all the time. If you have an artificial border, an arbitrary border between departments, you're going to get excessive handoffs. There's something that's my responsibility, but only this guy can fix it. And he's from another department that has another agenda. And I could give a lot of examples of why this is bad, but I'm sure you all know this better than I do. We've got wrong goals. Our goal is not to write code. Our goal is not to install servers. It's not to do configuration management. Our goal is to make money by making clients happy. That's our goal. But it's very easy to forget that goal when you're working in a tiny silo, when you're only exposed to a very small fraction of the work and you don't know what the business goal is. When we scope the work on a limited narrative that doesn't include the business goal, we will get bad results. What we need are adaptation and improvement. And to achieve adaptation and improvement, we need to understand what the business is about. But we also need something else that's very important, and that's feedback. And the problem with silos is that they block feedback. You can't get feedback from production if production is somebody else's responsibility and only he is allowed to access it or get data from it. And again, taking from the Agile principles, they're talking about deliver, making working software frequently. The reason for that is feedback. They want to get client feedback as fast as possible. But this won't help you if feedback is blocked. So you're delivering software as fast as possible, but you're not getting any feedback back. Another very big problem that's very common is this. People manage resources instead of managing work. And what do I mean by resources? I mean people, time, and resources like hardware. People assume that resources are fixed, so that resources are flexible, and work is fixed. In reality, it's the other way around. Resources are fixed, and work is highly flexible. For example, hiring new developers, that's very, very hard. Sometimes you can't hire new developers, and even if you could, it's going to take months until you get them to be productive. So, resources are kind of fixed. You can't really change them. If you move a work item from one person to another, then the other person would have a context switch. That's going to delay his work. So you can't really do much about this. You can't really change resources as much as you wanted. Work, on the other hand, is very flexible. We tend to think of work as something static. This thing will take a day. Is that true? No. It could take a day, it could take a week, it could take a year. Depends who's doing it. Did he have his coffee in the morning? Did he get drunk last night? And so on. You know that if you're developing something and you think to yourself, you know what, I have this new awesome language, I'm going to write it in this new language. And suddenly this thing that would have taken you an hour takes you 3 days, just because you decided to implement it differently. And then after 3 days, you go like, this is too complicated, I'm going back to Python, and you finish that work in an hour. So that work could have taken you an hour or 3 days. It's kind of arbitrary, actually, kind of random. So what we need to do is focus on managing work instead of managing resources. And when I'm talking about managing work, I'm also talking about not doing work, which is the most important thing that I've learned. How not to do work. Yes, I'm lazy, I know, but it turns out to be very, very beneficial for the company as well. Work, if you know Parkinson's law says basically that work will expand to consume all possible resources or all available resources. That's very true. It's so easy to generate new tasks, new features. The only way we can keep that at bay is by constantly canceling work and constantly reducing the amount of work that we have. So, yeah, this is very important. And by the way, this sentence here is again from the Agile principles. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Which brings us to talk about time control. We all love time estimates, right? Why do people keep doing that? I have no idea. This time control, time management OCD, I don't know why people do that. And because we all know that time estimates are almost always wrong. This is not a secret, everybody knows this. And what happens is that the errors keep accumulating and we get projects that are a year late, like in Waterfall. And this also leads to this game of cheating and bartering, where you ask me how long this is going to take to you, and I think this is going to take 1 day. 4 days. It's going to take 4 days. And some change. And the other guys go, yeah, I know you're lying, so I'm going to write down 2 days, because I know you're lying. So why do we keep doing that? Why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. At this point, we have to ask ourselves, if we all know this sucks, why are we doing this? So it turns out we missed the essence of Agile. We've copycat all the ceremonies. We've copied all those nice DSMs, stand-up meetings, and retrospective meetings, and all those nice ceremonies, but we've missed the essence. And if you don't know this picture, this is cargo cult. Who knows what cargo cult is? Not a lot of people. Okay. So cargo cult is a very interesting thing that for me highlights how crazy our world is. During the Second World War, the Americans, they created bases all around the Pacific, army bases, and they started dropping off cargo, to feed the troops and supplies and that kind of stuff. And the natives there, one day, started seeing planes in the sky dropping off goods. And they were like, oh my God, this is magic. They get all this awesome stuff just by doing things like, marching the fields and building, towers and building something that looks very impressive, an airplane. And then the war ended. The Americans just packed everything up and went away, and the cargo stopped arriving. And the natives were like, okay, they stopped doing that, and the cargo stopped coming. Yeah, we want to bring cargo back, so we'll do the same thing. And they started building wooden airplanes and having army parades and building wooden radios and wooden control towers, hoping that this will bring cargo back. And this is what happens when you try to copycat, the ceremonies and the actions without understanding the essence of what they're about. And this is what happened with Agile. We have a cargo cult of Agile, unfortunately. So after this whole business with Agile, and this whole change that came from moving from boxes to downloadable software, the world changed again. We moved from products to services. Nobody's going to the store and buying Gmail, right? Gmail is somehow pushed to us. We just go to a website, we install nothing, we don't even run it on our computer, and we have a Gmail. And this changed a lot of things. Why? Because the operational environment that was on your computer until that time moved from your computer to Google's computer. Now everything is running on our servers. And that means that if we fuck up, if we have a bug, we're going to be the ones paying for it. If we overburn CPU, it's on our head. It's going to cost us dollars. So suddenly we started caring about operations. And that was painful. So we got DevOps. And DevOps attempts to deal with the cultural rifts that were suddenly visible between operations and developers. There were always rifts, but it was too easy to ignore them. They didn't hurt us as much. So what are we going to do next? I mean, obviously Agile failed us. I think it's time we start actively working on our culture. We need to have Agile development for culture. We need iterative improvements of culture. We need to work on culture. And every culture is different. You can't copy culture. You can try. It's not going to work. You need to develop your own culture iteratively, and you need to be attentive to your peers. And those are things that you might want to have in your culture. Maybe some other stuff. I don't know. Every culture is different. This is stuff I would like to see in my culture. And this guy that I told you about before, Eliyahu Golpat, he has a very nice quote. Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'll behave. The way you measure people, as managers, as peers, dictates how they will behave. This dictates the culture, basically. So if you want to change the culture, first thing you have to change is how you measure people. If you decide to promote somebody because he did this, other people will follow. It's that easy. Feedback loops. We need feedback loops for culture. And this is our parallel in the world of culture to deliver software often. Culture changes, people get feedback, they change the way they work and behave, they change the culture. You get feedback all the time. You behave in a certain manner, other people respond in some other manner. We need to enforce that, to reinforce that. We need to make it stronger. We need to be minded that it happens. And no DevOps conference can ever be complete without talking about Conway's Law. There you have Conway's Law. Organizations are constrained to building systems that mirror the communication patterns of the organizations that build them. The common example is that if you have 4 teams that are working on a compiler, you're going to get a 4-pass compiler. Makes sense. But what is the meaning of this law? How does that translate into what we see in the world? This law means that if we design a system, the design is going to be the same as the organizational structure. Here's the catch. Have you ever refactored? Of course. We all refactor all the time. We need refactoring. Why? Because our first design is probably pretty shitty. We don't know a lot about the problem. Clients' requirements change. The world changes. We change. We learn more. So we always want a second design, and a third design, and a fourth design. But all of our designs are going to end up the same because we haven't changed our organizational structure. So this means that in order to produce new designs, in order to improve our design, we need organizations that are adaptive. We need to change the way our organization is built every time we change our design. So we need adaptive organizations that promote change, that support change. And I mean change in the sense of our organizational structure. So please, let's make it work this time. We don't want to end up the same way Agile did. And try to keep that in mind. Thank you very much. And if you have some tomatoes to throw, now's a good time.
So, any questions? No questions. There are questions.
Hi. So I really like that initial slide of that wall separating.
It's another presentation, yeah. Okay.
So stability and development. And I think a very similar wall is separating us from our customers. So we, as a company, push for a change, and many of our customers just want stability because they're perfectly fine with what we deliver. So can you perhaps talk about this other wall separating companies and customers?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say upfront that I don't think stability is what IT should care about. I think they should care about quality, about customer satisfaction, which is totally different. There's this notion that stability provides, customer satisfaction. I don't think that's true. I think it's very easy for us to say that because it requires us less effort, basically. And I think it's also the same when we're talking about, the wall between us and our clients. We try to reduce that wall as much as possible. We try to be in constant contact with our clients. But the reality of the world is that not all clients are the same. Some of your clients want new features. Some of your clients couldn't care less. Some of your clients needed graphics and GUI and so on. Some are like me and think that terminal is the best thing that happened in UI and everything else was just, going down the drain. Your clients are very different. So it's strange that you say that your clients don't want something. Not all of them want the same thing. So it's better to talk about quality in the sense of how you're feeding your clients and about variety, how this varies between clients. And you have to accept that you can't make everyone happy, so you have to make some compromises. Having said all of that, it's also very important to remember another thing, which is that when you talk about this wall between you and your clients, this also means that you are not your client. Dog fooding, basically. If you're dog food and you like your product, then you have one satisfied customer at least. That's already a good start. And remember, there's something very interesting that Deming said. He said, don't tell me that clients call for features. Don't tell me that clients trigger those features. That's not true. No client ever demanded the microwave. Somebody invented this, put it in the market, and then clients liked it. So when you're talking about innovation, you have to accept that your clients don't know anything about what's possible. You know what's possible. So you have to constantly try out new things, even if the cost is making some people not happy. There are ways around this. For example, A/B testing and keeping compatibility and things like this. So you don't necessarily have to try it on all of your clients and aggravate all of your clients. And like we said before, different clients want different things. But you have to accept that, yeah, some of your clients are going to be upset.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so you said that DevOps is different for everyone, and that would be a good thing. Sometimes I'm wondering whether something like a DevOps manifesto would actually help us, because then no vendor can sell DevOps anymore. You can't hire a DevOps and have DevOps now installed, and you perhaps reduce the confusion that's out there in the world if we have some kind of definition what is DevOps. What are your thoughts about that?
So I didn't invent DevOps. So I'm not in any position to say what I think DevOps should be. It's a fact of life that we don't have the DevOps manifesto. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just reality. You also have to remember that all those hacky workarounds that we have, like DevOps engineers and DevOps tools, are not always a bad thing. Because sometimes companies don't really want DevOps. They want to stay the same. And the only way to introduce innovation into them is by saying, no, this is not disruptive at all. No, not at all. This is, plain old scripting. It's not configuration manager. It's not configuration manager. It's not innovative. Just use that. And, 3 years later, they suddenly have sysadmins writing code, and everything changed. So sometimes that works. Also remember that not all organizations are the same. Like a young startup, they're open to a lot of things that enterprises are not. And yeah, we all dislike enterprises and so on, but we have to remember that they're people too, and we want to help them. They want to help us. And for them, maybe this would work better. So, I don't know, I think there are places for all of those.